The little girl was already sinking beneath the surface when the billionaire mother realized the man diving after her was the same stranger her daughter had been silently watching all morning. Moments later, when he pulled 8-year-old Elsie Hart from the water, the entire crowd expected him to disappear like an ordinary hero. Instead, he knelt beside the trembling child, lifted his hands, and began signing to her in perfect American Sign Language. Vivian Hart froze. Her daughter had been unable to speak since a traumatic illness years earlier, and almost nobody outside their private circle knew how deeply Elsie struggled to communicate. Yet this exhausted single father somehow knew exactly what she needed. And if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to our channel so you can become part of our family and our community. The morning had begun peacefully at a lakeside charity event hosted by Vivian Hart, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Vivian was known for building technology companies, buying struggling businesses, and turning impossible financial situations into extraordinary success. Newspapers called her fearless, brilliant, and unstoppable. But there was one thing money had never been able to fix. Her 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, had stopped speaking after a devastating medical ordeal when she was 6. The doctors had explained that her vocal ability might eventually return, but the emotional damage surrounding her silence was harder to predict. Elsie could hear perfectly, understand everything, and communicate through signing, writing, and expressions, but she rarely trusted strangers enough to reveal that world to them. Vivian had built an enormous protective wall around her daughter, hiring specialists, tutors, therapists, and security professionals. She could purchase almost anything, except the one thing she wanted most, a world where Elsie did not feel broken. Across the crowded park stood a man nobody important seemed to notice. His name was Callum Reed, a 38-year-old single father who worked maintenance jobs while raising his 7-year-old son, Theo. Callum wore a faded blue work shirt and carried a small lunch bag that had clearly seen better days. His boots were scuffed, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of physical labor, and there was a quiet tiredness behind his eyes. Yet there was something unusual about the way he observed people. He noticed exits. He noticed crowds. He noticed which children were near the water and which adults were distracted. Theo had asked him why he always did that, and Callum had simply smiled and said that fathers were supposed to notice things. Elsie had noticed Callum too. She had been sitting beneath a tree, drawing pictures while Vivian spoke with investors and charity organizers. Theo wandered over after his father gave him permission to play nearby. The two children did not need many words to become friends. Elsie showed him a drawing of a lighthouse. Theo showed her a toy compass. When Elsie signed something, Theo looked confused, but Callum understood immediately. He approached slowly, crouched to Elsie's level, and signed back. Elsie's eyes widened. For the first time that morning, her guarded expression disappeared. Vivian saw it from across the lawn and stopped breathing for a moment. She hurried toward them, startled by the sight of her daughter communicating freely with a complete stranger. She was about to demand an explanation when the world suddenly changed. A loud metallic crash came from the dock. A maintenance barrier had broken loose, sending a section of the railing toward the water. Elsie stumbled backward, lost her balance, and fell into the lake. Vivian screamed and ran toward the dock, but the distance was too great. Security guards were moving through the crowd, people were shouting, and for several terrible seconds nobody reached the child. Then Callum dropped everything. He ran. He crossed the dock, jumped over the broken railing, and disappeared beneath the water without hesitation. Vivian watched in horror. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Finally, Callum surfaced with Elsie pressed against his chest. He swam toward the dock with one arm while keeping the child's head above water. 2 security officers pulled them up. Callum immediately rolled Elsie onto her side, checked her breathing, and began giving her calm instructions through signs rather than words. Elsie was terrified, coughing and shaking, but she recognized his hands. She reached for him. Callum signed that she was safe. Vivian dropped beside her daughter and wrapped her arms around her. Tears covered her face as she looked at the stranger who had just risked his life without knowing who Elsie was, how wealthy her family was, or whether anyone would ever thank him. But then Vivian noticed something else. Callum was breathing strangely. His right hand was trembling. He looked at the water with an expression that was not ordinary fear. It was the face of a man remembering something he had spent years trying to forget. When the paramedics arrived, Callum quietly stepped away. He checked Theo, who was crying but unharmed, and prepared to leave. Vivian followed him, still holding Elsie's wet hand. She wanted to reward him. That was how she understood gratitude. She offered money, medical assistance, a job, anything he wanted. Callum refused everything. That confused Vivian. People did not refuse her. But Callum simply explained through calm gestures that he had done what anyone should have done. Elsie tugged at her mother's sleeve. Then she signed something. Vivian looked at her daughter, unable to understand. Elsie pointed at Callum. Then she made the sign for soldier. Vivian's heart stopped. Callum noticed the gesture and immediately became still. He asked Elsie, through signs, why she thought that. Elsie pointed at the way he had moved in the water. Callum's face changed. He gently asked Vivian if he could speak with her privately. What Vivian learned over the next few minutes was something Callum had hidden from almost everyone in his civilian life. Years earlier, he had served as a Navy SEAL. He had spent years in situations where seconds meant life or death. He had learned advanced rescue techniques, tactical awareness, underwater survival, and sign-based communication for operations where silence was essential. But his military career had ended after a mission overseas went horribly wrong. 3 members of his team had died. Callum had survived. He carried that survival like a debt. After leaving the military, he married his childhood friend, Maren. They had Theo, and for a few precious years Callum believed his life had finally become ordinary. Then Maren died unexpectedly from a sudden medical emergency, leaving him alone with a small child and a mountain of grief. Callum never returned to military work. He took whatever civilian jobs allowed him to remain close to Theo. Vivian listened in silence. For the first time in years, she recognized a familiar kind of pain in another person. She had never lost control of her life financially, but she had spent years controlling everything around Elsie because she was terrified of losing her too. That afternoon, Vivian invited Callum and Theo to her home for lunch, not as a billionaire rewarding a hero, but as a mother asking another father to stay for a little while. Callum hesitated, then accepted. Elsie spent the afternoon sitting beside Theo, showing him drawings. Callum and Vivian watched from across the room. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Elsie began looking forward to seeing Callum and Theo. She communicated more. She laughed more. She even started teaching Theo signs. Callum never treated her like a fragile child. He treated her like a child who happened to communicate differently. Vivian slowly realized that this was what Elsie had needed all along. Not another specialist. Not another expensive program. Someone who saw her without pity. But Vivian's fear did not disappear easily. She began investigating Callum's past through her private security team. She discovered the details of his military service and became frightened by what she found. There had been classified missions, commendations, injuries, and a psychological evaluation following his final deployment. Vivian convinced herself that she was protecting Elsie. When Callum learned she had investigated him without permission, he felt betrayed. He did not shout. That made it worse. He simply stopped coming. Elsie noticed immediately. She stopped drawing. She stopped signing. She returned to the silence Vivian had spent years desperately trying to break. Vivian finally understood the damage her fear had caused. She drove to Callum's small home one afternoon and found him repairing Theo's bicycle in the driveway. She apologized without excuses. She admitted that she had treated his past like a threat because she was terrified of letting another person close to her daughter. Callum listened. Then Vivian said something she had never been brave enough to admit aloud. She had spent so much time protecting Elsie from pain that she had accidentally protected her from life. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Then he forgave her. Not because what she had done was acceptable, but because he understood what fear could turn good people into. Their friendship slowly returned. Months passed, and Elsie's progress became remarkable. She began speaking a few words again. The first was not her mother's name or a complicated sentence. It was Callum's name. Vivian cried when she heard it. Callum did too. But the greatest change happened inside Callum himself. For years he had believed surviving his SEAL missions meant he had failed the men who died beside him. Through Elsie, he finally understood that survival was not punishment. It was responsibility. He had survived so he could protect, teach, love, and raise Theo. Vivian eventually offered Callum a leadership position in a new foundation dedicated to helping children with disabilities and families struggling after traumatic events. He accepted, but only after making one condition: the organization would never measure a child's worth by what they could not do. Vivian agreed. Years later, the foundation became one of the largest privately funded programs of its kind. Callum remained humble. He still preferred simple clothes, still repaired broken bicycles himself, and still packed Theo's lunches before work. Vivian remained wealthy, but she no longer measured life by numbers in financial reports. And Elsie? She became the heart of everything. One bright afternoon, several years after the lake accident, Elsie stood before hundreds of families at the Foundation's annual gathering. She was older now, confident, expressive, and surrounded by children who communicated in different ways. She looked toward Callum. Then toward Vivian. And she signed something that made both adults cry. She signed that sometimes the person who saves you is not the person who pulls you out of the water. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one who teaches you that you were never drowning because you were different. You were drowning because you believed you were alone. Vivian reached for Callum's hand. Callum squeezed it. Neither of them needed words. They had both discovered that wealth could build buildings, soldiers could survive impossible battles, and doctors could offer treatments, but healing often began with something much smaller, one person choosing to see another person with kindness. Before we reach the final moment of this story, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe the greatest lesson is. Is it forgiveness, second chances, courage, or simply the power of being seen when you feel invisible? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. That evening was still bright when Elsie walked beside Callum and Theo across the foundation garden. She suddenly stopped, looked at Callum, and signed the same message she had given him years earlier. You saved me. Callum smiled and shook his head gently. He signed back that she had saved him too. And Vivian, watching the two people who had changed her life, finally understood something she had spent years searching for. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with wealth, fame, or applause. Sometimes they arrive as a tired single father in worn-out boots, diving into cold water for a child he has never met. Sometimes they arrive as a silent little girl who teaches a broken soldier how to forgive himself. And sometimes, the person you think you are rescuing is actually the person who came into your life to rescue you.